Have you ever looked at a pattern in your life and thought, I'm just stuck this way forever? Well, in today's episode, Nicole Neuroscience is actually going to completely change how you think about that, because Nicole is going to reveal the fascinating science behind why our brains get stuck in these cycles, and more importantly, how we can break free. What I love most about Nicole is how she makes complex neuroscience so relatable and practical for our everyday lives. So whether you're struggling with self-sabotage, negative thought patterns, or you're just feeling stuck in old behaviors, this conversation is going to completely change how you think about your brain's potential to change. I know you're going to love this one, so let's jump right in. I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, I was just saying to you off air that I have come into this podcast recording feeling a little wired. And one of the most beautiful things about your book, Rewire, which we're going to dive into, there's so much to talk about in this episode about Rewire, but you have this exercise that you describe the science behind that allows people just to regulate and just be more present. I would love if you could guide me and the audience through that so I can ground into this conversation and everyone can get ready to hear your magic.
Absolutely. So it's called the physiological sigh. So you inhale once through the nose, and then at the top you take an extra sip, and I'll explain later why that is. We'll do it first and then I'll explain it. And then a long exhale through the mouth, and you can sigh as well. So you can actually go, if you want to. So let's do maybe 5 rounds together. Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay.
Let's go.
So nice. Good. 3 more. Two more. That is so nice.
Oh my God, I needed that.
I'm going to go back to sleep.
Oh, how beautiful is it that something like that can just regulate us in a moment?
Totally. So we have this sort of sighing mechanism ingrained in our brain. So we have the brain stem at the back, which regulates our breathing rate. And you may have noticed that when you're stressed, you may walk around the house huffing and puffing and kind of sighing. And we've associated that with a negative thing, but it's actually really good for us to sigh because we're essentially getting rid of the stress, dumping carbon dioxide, for lack of a better term. And so, that sigh is a really good thing. It's just that for some reason, somewhere we started associated with negative information. Of course, if you're sighing at work all the time, then I would say it's a call for concern. Oh, gotta be here again. But the sigh is really good. So it's essentially resetting your breathing mechanism. And what's really interesting is that your alveoli, which are these little sacs that are inside your lungs, they are responsible for oxygen transformation, and all the work that the lungs do goes into the alveoli. And what happens is these alveoli actually, they collapse. So they become inefficient at inflating because they aren't used as much, especially if we're breathing very shallow, which a lot of people are, especially if you're in a state of chronic stress. You've got this kind of shallow type breathing. So how often do you really fill up your lungs and then really expand them and really contract them? So that's what that double inhale does, is it pops the alveoli open, the ones that have essentially collapsed.
It's so powerful. I think the first time I ever read about the psychological sigh, I was like, wow, I feel like my parents have been doing this for a really long time. And I used to think it was because they were angry, but now I realize, they were just regulating. Like when you hear like a dad or like a male just let out a big sigh, and I'm like, you were just trying to regulate. That was just you trying to like handle your emotions.
Yeah, I love sighing as well. I think I do it when I'm working. I don't even realize, but I love it.
Yeah. Well, I want to say I'm so excited to have you on. We are going to be talking all about Rewire.
Oh, thank you.
Amazing book. So I gave everyone a little bit of background about you in the intro, but I do want to just share a little bit of personal background rather than the professional side. So you have been what would I say? You've been my sounding board while writing Magnetic, which is my book.
And they look so good together, may I say?
Yes, they do. Look at them. They're 2 peas in a pod.
Yeah. Coffee table books.
Yeah, so we had the same editor at Penguin, and I think that we just kind of touched base, and you have dealt with many a voice notes of me being like, what was your typesetting like?
Yeah, but you've also listened to a lot of my voice notes about my personal life. So
you've been an absolute superhero on my writing journey. And I am so excited that people, I think when you have a really wise friend and you're like, wow, I wish other people had access to this really wise friend. I actually can be like, hey, I have this really wise friend and they wrote a book. You should read the book.
Oh, that is so sweet. Thank you. I love it.
So I love that. And I feel we'd love to just dive in this episode all about your beautiful book and your work. And one of the things I really want to highlight on this episode and just about you in general is that you really show us that we can all rewire our brain. We can all change no matter what age we are and no matter where we are in our life, and that you really take that power back into people, that we are in charge of being able to change the patterns in our life and write a new story, which I think is just such an empowering way to look at life.
Thank you.
And I'd just love to hear just a little bit, maybe to start off, about why that message was important to you to share and how that relates to maybe your own journey.
Do you know, I've been asked many questions on podcasts, but I don't think anyone's actually ever framed it the way that you just have. And that's really interesting because they always say, why did you go into neuroscience? But no one's ever asked me, why did I feel compelled to share that message? And thank you for that. Wow. So where do I begin?
We've got all day. Just dive in.
Well, I observed some very interesting patterns in my family growing up, mostly codependency, unhealthy, toxic, intermittent reinforcements of sort of highs and lows, very sort of classic toxic behavior. And so I didn't realize this, obviously, but I was carrying a lot of those toxic behaviors in my life, in my adulthood, in my 20s, falling for men that were unavailable, I can fix them, or, getting myself into trouble.
We love I'll fix him.
I'm not fixing anybody anymore. I am done.
We love a woman that knows her standards and knows her worth.
And actually, do you know what? And that's a really interesting point, because I always talk about this, and maybe we can put a pin on it and come back to it, because I get a lot of questions around breakups. And I always say to people, I'm like, you have a database now of what you want and what you don't want. So it sucks, obviously, but I promise you're going to upgrade. But anyway, back to my story is I ended up going into therapy because I was dating a cocaine addict with my own drug problems, and I sort of had to reassess my entire life. And he dumped me, actually. So I was a bit like, okay, we need to chat, girl. Spent a few months of my time in Narcotics Anonymous myself, just figuring out if I had any addiction problems. Turns out I don't. I still had to go and explore, and I went into therapy, and I realized that these patterns that I was enacting were patterns that I'd observed in my family, but I didn't realize the importance or the understanding of this kind of observational knowledge that you gain from your parents. So I was literally going Control V, Control V, Control V with my life, with what I'd seen in my family. And the therapist said, she's like, oh, you're repeating the same patterns as your mother. And I was like, oh, yeah, penny drop. And I realized that I had more control over my situations than I thought I did. And nobody forced me to be in that relationship. It was all me. And I have compassion for myself, of course, but I also had to take extreme ownership in that situation and realize that actually a lot of the stuff that I was bringing to myself was self-inflicted, even if it was inadvertently. And I just felt really empowered. I started doing a lot of yoga, went back to ballet. That pretty much saved my life. And I just learned a lot about myself. And I've realized that actually we have the power. It's not all fate. You can also change the course of that fate. It's fate if you want it to be.
And then that kind of took you on this journey of being like, okay, now how did you get into the profession that you're in now? Like, how did you start studying and take that whole route?
Yeah, well, I was always deeply fascinated with psychology, even before going into therapy and all of that. Neuroscience was a pretty new subject at the time. So I wanted to do medicine with neuroscience because I thought that that was the kind of route to do it, neurology. I got rejected 11 times from medical school.
That's so amazing that I'm sorry, but can we just say, like, how amazing is that you got rejected and then here you are with a book? I love that.
Yeah, so I applied 3 times, so 3 years in a row. And yeah, I applied to 11 different universities and got rejected every single time. And a funny story, I actually got rejected from Leicester University twice, even though the second year I hadn't applied to them. And they were like, we're so sorry, we accidentally sent you the wrong letter. I was like, you get it. I get it. You don't want me. It's all good. Yeah, so anyway. And then somebody told me about neuroscience. And at the time, it wasn't very popular. Human was obviously around, but he wasn't really as popularized in the podcast scene. And yeah, I thought, okay, I'll give it a go. And then if I still want to do medicine, I'll apply again later. You can give me 10 out of 10 for perseverance. And yeah, I just loved it. I mean, I hated it, but I loved it as well. Half the time, I didn't know what was going on, but it was actually only after I finished my degree that I realized how applicable it is to everyday life. Because obviously when you're at university, you're studying the nitty gritty, the things on a nanometer scale that you can't even see to the naked eye. So I was kind of thinking, what is the point of any of this? Lol, because here I am.
Wow. I love that your journey is literally kind of like the process of rewiring your own brain. And then now you've written a book about Rewire and how that people can take that journey. And I think it's so beautiful because I think someone will look at a book like yours on the shelf and think, wow, like this person's a neuroscientist and like they must be so up here and never had a problem in their life and be so kind of matter of fact. And we look at things from face value and then we don't realize like the story behind the person who's written the book. And I think that's just so empowering just to know a little bit more about your story and your background and why this is so, important and like you're so passionate about it.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that. It wasn't an easy journey. It didn't come from money. I studied much older. I was 26 when I decided to go back to university. It was an interesting feat. And I think, I think anyone can do it. I think my story does inspire people because they see me as a neuroscientist and think, oh my gosh, you must have gone, straight out of school and got all the grades. I didn't get the grades. I actually failed high school pretty much. I mean, I finished with 48%. So I guess I passed, but if you really consider that a pass, it's questionable. But so I had to redo everything in my adulthood. At age 23, I went back to college. At age 25, I was doing my GCSEs, which is what you do when you're 15 years old. And I was sitting in a room with teenagers redoing my maths and English. So yeah, it's thank you.
That is just a testament to Rewire, honestly. And to me, it makes the book and means so much more when they know that little bit more about you, because I feel like then they'll go, wow, maybe I'm not stuck where I am. Maybe I can rewrite my story and rewire my brain. So amazing.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So I've got some questions for you that I have pre-written that I want to dive into that I'm super excited about. I think one of the things that I think is so empowering about your book is this idea of breaking old patterns. I think that for me, one of the most relatable parts of the book is about how we can break patterns of self-sabotaging our habits and why we hold on to certain habits that hurt us and how we can start to let them go and create like a new version of ourselves. How do you feel for you've let go of, like in your own personal life? What's an example of something that you've rewired that was like a old outdated habit that you've kind of changed?
Goodness, wow, so much. Definitely, I'll break it down from habits all the way through to behaviors. So behaviors is more kind of like my issues with codependency. And I actually, for a long time, thought that attachment styles were a little bit of a hoax. And I thought they were a bit kind of like, it's the psychological community trying to add a narrative or a label to, yet again, people. But turns out that they're actually pretty ingrained in our DNA. And that doesn't mean that you can't change it. And I would say that I definitely have more of kind of like an anxious, avoidant attachment style. So when the going gets tough, I'm like, I'm out. I don't need to be here. And it's anxious in the sense that I'm not clingy, but I'm very, I would have been very prone to attaching myself to other people whilst also being avoidant at the same time. That's even possible. And I think that that's one of the biggest behaviors that I've rewired. And I did that by really getting to know myself and really spending time alone. So when I moved to Bristol, it was the loneliest time of my life. I'd just been dumped by my boyfriend, so the one I've just spoke about, moved to a new city, was about to start a new degree at the age of 26. Everyone was 8-9 years younger than me. And I thought, oh my gosh. And it was a sad time, but it was such a profound part of my life because it really helped me to rediscover, or actually just discover myself and who I was, and go into therapy and spend time alone and really pay attention to these patterns that I picked up, these narratives, these stories that I've been telling myself for so long. And that, I would say, is the biggest one, because I have such a secure attachment with myself now that when it comes to other people and relationships, I'm there. Like when I'm there, I'm committed. But if I'm not there, then I'm not trying to cling on to those things that your average person, I think, would want to cling on to. Does that make sense? Like I can't think of any particular examples. But if someone doesn't want to be in my life, I'm okay with it. Whereas in the past, I would have tried so badly to keep them there. And I'll give you an exercise that I started doing during my yoga sessions. For anyone that's listening to this and thinks, gosh, I really do try and control the outcome of things. I started doing this meditation where I was picturing myself, visualizing myself in the ocean. And I knew that the shore was there, so that there were people there that I loved, that I felt safe, and I could swim back anytime. And I remember thinking that I was like, my mum's there, my sister's there, I love them all so much. And I started visualizing myself, like anything that came my way, I would just let it come. And anything that would float away, I would just let it go. And that was, I remember thinking at the time, that was really difficult for me because I tried so badly to hold on to relationships. I've lost friendships because I was so needy, so codependent, so, desperate for approval and attention. And so that was a big part of my journey, is learning how to allow things to come, and whatever needs to be there stays, and whatever wants to go away, go. And that I practice that meditation probably once a week.
Wow, love that.
Yeah.
That's so powerful.
That's the behavior side of things. Habits, I mean, gosh, I it's hard to say because I never really had terrible habits apart from maybe drinking and drug taking. But is that a habit? I don't know. I think that was more kind of like a numbing experience rather than a habit that I had to break, if that makes sense. I would say I've adopted a lot of good habits, better routines for myself, better structure, more discipline, I think that what I've really learned to do is add these self-regulatory tools to my toolbox that I fall back on. So when I'm feeling a particular way, instead of catastrophizing or binge scrolling or whatever, I think, okay, what do I need right now? And it's usually a stretch. It's usually a glass of water, or whatever, instead of saying, what have I broken? What have I adopted into my life? And that is falling back on these things that help me rather than deter from my well-being.
Yeah. And I think when you were talking about like that moment when you were like spending a lot of time by yourself, I think that's obviously really about awareness, right? So you're becoming like super aware of your behaviors. You're starting to observe yourself and watch yourself and be like, oh, this is what's, going on.
Yeah.
So I'd love you just to talk a little bit about awareness and how much like the state of being aware of ourselves like plays a role in rewiring.
Absolutely. So I do think that before that, and some people call it the awakening or whatever, I was definitely running on autopilot, sort of not really even aware of anything I was doing. It was just kind of like predetermined patterns. And I was just sort of ticking that box every time to prove that this was my trajectory, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think sometimes you have to, not always, but I think you have to really pay attention to what is going on around you and hit rock bottom. I guess mine was rock bottom, to really assess, and it forces you to pay attention. Now, from a neuroscientific perspective, attention is the key to change, because what that does is it increases norepinephrine and acetylcholine in the brain. Now, you need those two prerequisites to make any plastic change. So they did a study. Mike Merzenich, he's one of the grandfathers of neuroplasticity. He basically did a series of experiments where they had this, oh God, I can't remember what the word is, but it's this sort of spinning thing that had bubbles on it. And they asked individuals to place their finger on it and then think about something else. And they were basically measuring whether there was any activity of neuroplasticity in the brain. And there wasn't. As soon as they asked them to pay attention to the feeling, there was plasticity in the part of the brain that picks up sensory information from the finger.
Oh, wow.
Exactly. So you have to pay attention to something if you want to make a change, because otherwise it just becomes part of the background. Your brain is going to save energy for more cognitively demanding tasks, not extra things. You have to say to the brain, this is important, this is important. Otherwise it just ends up being part of the background. And so awareness is essentially increasing or making the brain more ready for change, because you've got these two neurotransmitters now present in the brain.
And if someone wants to action that and start feeling more aware in their day-to-day life, if they feel like they're repeating the same patterns, what would you suggest that they start doing?
I think slowing down with everything. I lose stuff a lot. I was speaking to my sister and I was saying to her, I was like, I don't lose things because I forget where they are. I lose them because I haven't paid attention to where I've put them. And that was such a huge penny drop for her, because she's the same way. And I was like, you're constantly thinking about the next thing, that you're not paying attention to what you're doing right there and then. And so out of automaticity, you just place the keys down wherever is the easiest place. And I think that that's really important to understand, because a lot of the time we're just constantly like living in the future. And if you can just slow down and start paying attention to the things that you're doing on a daily basis and putting intention into your practices, putting intention into going to the gym. I don't take my phone. I mean, I try, I'm not perfect, but I've actually bought a new iPhone, like one of the old iPhone 10s, that just has music on it, and I'll leave my phone at home and I'll just take that one for music.
I love it.
Yeah, I haven't got anything else on there. I mean, you know, for anyone that has safety concerns, I guess you could get a SIM card that just has a number that somebody has or whatever. But I don't need that. I live on an island that's pretty safe. So, and I think just, slowing down with everything is already such a good way to start paying attention to the present moment.
I'm really curious. I had this question that I wanted to ask you, which is, as someone that's written a book as well, I think when we're writing books, we have this core idea of what we want people to get from the book. As like an author, we have something that we're like, oh, this is going to be huge for people, but everyone reads things from where they're at, right? We're all taking information and learning different things. When you wrote Rewire, what was like kind of something that you really hope that everyone reads the book, is like a penny drop moment that everyone has, or what's like a big takeaway that is just from, it doesn't necessarily have to be what everyone is having, but from you as an author writing the book that you were like, oh, I want people to feel this. Is there anything that comes to mind?
I think I really wanted people to feel hope. Because I think when you don't have hope, that's when you have despair. You have fear that you aren't capable. You have fear that the state you're in is the state you're going to be in forever. But when you have hope, and it goes back to that feeling of when you're in the depths of despair, like I was a couple of weeks ago, it was like, I know that this is going to change because I have hope. I have the tools. I have the knowledge. I know that it's not static. Whereas some people will sometimes hit those lows and think that this is it forever. And so hope, I think, shows you that you can change, that there's a way out, that there's a possibility of things being different, which I think is what we can all try and hold on to.
Yeah. And speaking of hope, I'd just love you to talk a little bit about neuroplasticity and how science is showing us that we all have hope, no matter, it doesn't have to be 25 anymore. Because there was this rhetoric or this kind of messaging for so long in the scientific community. And I think even when I was growing up, I don't know when it changed, but there was something in the collective consciousness that past 25, you're set, you're done, you're burned, that's it. You're stuck with, you're stuck with whatever shit habits or whatever behaviors or identity you were set at. And I think the most empowering thing that we're kind of learning is that it's not 25. So I'd love you to talk a little bit about that.
So 25 is the correct age in the sense that that's when we still have developmental plasticity. And what that means is that our levels of BDNF, which is a neurotrophin, which is responsible for creating new pathways, is still very prevalent. So it kind of peaks in teenagehood, and then it starts to taper off. And then by age 25, that tapers off, not completely because you still have BDNF as an adult. But what that means is that up until the age of 25, you're very good at absorbing information, so passively learning things without having to pay attention to them. After the age of 25, that's when your brain is set, and I put that in quotes and quotes for anyone that can't see the video. And that means that basically you have to now tell the brain what is important, because it's created a set of rules and structures about how the universe works based on what it has learned. And it's not going to tell you to change things if it doesn't need to. So you have to manually say, hey, brain, this is important and I would like to change this. So as adults, you can't put on a French tape or a French recording and expect to learn the words. Whereas as a child, you would be able to put on French in the background every single day, and your child will probably learn a big chunk of French. Right. And that's because the brain it wants to save energy for more cognitively demanding tasks. And so you're not set, but you just have to put a little bit more attention into it.
This is just a friendly reminder that time is running out to enter my competition to win a spot for you and your bestie at the Empress Retreat in Cyprus, as well as claim 6 months free access to the Mindspo app and access my brand new magnetic portal community, simply by pre-ordering a copy of my debut book, Magnetic. All you need to do to enter is click the link down below in the show notes and follow the steps to go in the running and unlock your access to all of the bonuses. Not only that, but by pre-ordering, you'll also be one of the first people to get a copy of Magnetic this January, so you can start 2025 unlocking the secrets to manifesting the life of your dreams by working with your subconscious mind. Don't wait and don't miss out, because this competition is closing super soon. Take action now and claim this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And now let's get back to the episode.
And what's interesting is that we have neuroplasticity well into old age. They're looking at individuals with dementia and they're using neuroplasticity as a potential therapeutic intervention to alleviate some of the symptoms that are associated with dementia. And that's crazy to me because we have the ability to induce BDNF. So BDNF is released when we're learning something new or when we exercise, predominantly through aerobic exercise. And so if you're exercising regularly, and you're continuously putting yourself in new situations, your brain is probably going to be abundant in BDNF. Now, interestingly, BDNF is also associated with psychiatric disorders such as depression. I'm not saying that exercise is going to cure all of your depression, but it will put you in a very good position to be able to rewire your brain and thoughts, etc., and also put your brain, the hardware component of your brain, in a better state to deal with the emotions, the thoughts, the feelings. And so exercise is one of the best ways to quote unquote manifest or to rewire because it's setting you up for success. It's priming the brain to make those changes. It's like the perfect duo.
No, I love that so much. I think one of the things that I find students of Mindspo and that are kind of in our, I guess, like ecosystem, a lot of the time they become aware because we have a lot of people that listen to this podcast that meditate. It's a beautiful thing growing a community around meditation because you end up with a lot of very self-aware, very empowered people. And I think one of the scary things though with awareness is that you start to realize all of the things that maybe you're doing that aren't the best. And one of the things that I think sometimes shocks our community when it comes to awareness is that they'll start noticing just how many negative thoughts that they're having in their mind and how incessant they are thinking the same things over and over and over again and how they have these kind of like loops of thoughts. And I'd love you just to talk a little bit about how thoughts obviously shape our brain and our pathways. We think the same thoughts over and over and over again. But I'd love you just to talk a little bit about like how we could maybe become aware of that and then maybe shift that language. How can we shift that dialogue from incessant negative speak inside our mind to maybe like a more positive and uplifting way of speaking to ourselves?
I love that you said that because you said that part of the awakening or part of the understanding or the awareness is that you start to pay attention to all those negative thoughts. Oh, got a puppy. I don't know if you heard that, but that was so sweet. He was yawning. And that is that, you have to pay attention to those thoughts before you can change them. And so before you became aware of them, they were probably still there influencing your life. And even though now you're aware of them, now you actually have the opportunity to make a change, which I think is beautiful in itself. So I think that that's a good thing. I wouldn't have, anyone listening to this be worried about it. I think if anything, it's an opportunity to really start implementing those changes. And there's a couple of things that you can do. So one of the things is metacognition. So your ability to observe the thoughts and detach yourself from them so that you don't attach them to your identity. Now, I interestingly used to have a lot of negative thoughts about myself. And it's weird because even at the lowest of lows, I have negative thoughts, of course, but they're not directed at me anymore. I was thinking about this yesterday, so it's interesting that you said that because I realized I don't speak to myself badly anymore. I realized that a while ago, but it was interesting to remember that. So being able to detach yourself and observe the thoughts is a really helpful tool in essentially detaching yourself from them. Another thing that you can do is to name how you're feeling. So when we accurately name our emotions, we actually remove the emphasis from the amygdala and your fear processing center in the brain, and you reinstate activity in the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for more logical thinking. So you're putting yourself in a place of empowerment. Another thing that helps, so you can sort of follow these 1, 2, you can self-regulate as well. So oftentimes we have negative thoughts and they catastrophize into a stressful response. So doing something like the physiological sigh, again, will remove all of that stress that you can think about these thoughts more clearly. But another thing that you could do is I always add a yet to the end, reframing that thought. So you might think you're not good enough. What about saying you're not good enough yet, but you can learn? And I think that that's really helpful because it starts to show us that we have the ability to change. Now, Carol Dweck is a researcher in mindsets, and she basically for years has been studying children. And what they've done is that they basically told one group of children that they were super smart and they were very intelligent and emphasizing their character. And then they told the other group that they were very good at finding solutions to problems and that their efforts were being seen. And what they saw was that the children that were told they were super smart would avoid complex problem solving problems because they were afraid that if they got it wrong, it would be an attack on their personality. Whereas the children that were told that they were so good at trying and their efforts were being seen, they were willing to take risks and they were willing to be proven wrong as well because they knew that it didn't have anything to do with them as a person. And I think that is really powerful because we start to see that actually when we fail in life or when we don't have all the answers or we're doing things wrong, it's because it's not because of us. We have the ability to then put in more effort to change that.
Yeah, that's all about like the growth mindset, isn't it? Honestly, I love her research. I did a deep dive into growth mindset when I was writing Magnetic. And I think that one thing I found so interesting is on your point, the idea of I've rephrased a lot of my affirmations to be more growth orientated affirmations rather than identity fixed affirmations. And this is like an exercise that I actually have in my own book, which is like, okay, stop just saying I'm an amazing performer. It's I am committed to putting in effort towards creating amazing performances every single day. And then I created this exercise and it helped me so much because exactly what you said, this identity piece is such a huge thing. And we talk a lot about this with the manifestation stuff is always about identity. But oh my gosh, in my own life, the amount of times that I've had a fixation on having a certain identity. And then when I don't achieve that identity or I fall short of that, it's like an attack on who I am as a person. And then it can get into your self-esteem. But now I'm like, okay, no, I'm just committed to being someone that is committed to improving this. It's not that like I am, for example, if I was to say I'm the best podcaster in the world, not that I say that to myself, but if that was my affirmation and then I was never hitting the top 100 podcasts or whatever it was, I'd be like, this is always feeling like I'm never getting there. But if instead I was saying I'm committed to always producing incredible podcasts with inspiring guests and having elevating conversations, then that's a growth orientated thing that I can fixate towards. And that helped me. I love that you mentioned that because that helped me so much. It's been a huge thing for me.
Yeah, I love that you said that because the brain works on evidence. We need evidence to prove ourselves right. And so if you say to yourself, I'm the best podcaster in the world, and then you don't hit that top 100, that's evidence that you are wrong. It's evidence that you're not good enough. And so the brain will attach itself to that and form a database of information based on the evidence that it's gaining from the external world. And so I love that you're sort of more growth orientated, and it's actually such a good tool that I just said that in an Australian accent. Good. Good. Has one 30-minute podcast with an Australian, and I'm already like, no.
Oh no, my brain's not in the growth mindset.
I say that sometimes. I'm like, no, that's no in Australian. But yeah, basically, I love that you said that. So it's great. I'm going to start adopting that as well.
Yeah, it's been really, really helpful for me. I love her research. I think like deep diving into her stuff is so interesting. And I love how much she's worked with children. I think that I get so excited when people focus on children's development. I think, as you've said in your book, we can all grow way into adulthood, but I get so excited about let's just start making the right choices for the little ones now so we don't have to backtrack and try and fix them when they're in their 40s and 50s and it's like it's taking a little bit longer.
Yeah, I mean, I see my sister raising my niece, and when she's stressed, my sister will be like, take a big breath, and she goes, she's 4 years old, and I'm like, it's so sweet. God, it's so sweet. And now she does that as well. So she, like, when she gets really stressed, I can see her. She's got this tool to be able to regulate. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's amazing.
I'd love you to talk a little bit about visualization from a neuroscience perspective, because I think this is such a popular tool in, the manifestation, personal development space. And the beautiful thing about visualization is there's just so much research that backs it up these days. There's so much science behind it. So I'd love you to talk a little bit about, do you use visualization? What are your thoughts on it?
Yes. So I would say that exercise that I gave you earlier with the ocean, that's definitely a type of visualization. And so visualization is really helpful in changing these kind of behaviors, if you will, like I've just explained, or changing habits. So when we look at athletic performance or athletes, we see that when we make them visualize a particular movement before then enacting it physically, there's a real connection between the cerebellum and the motor cortex, the part of the brain that's responsible for initiating movement. And so the functional connectivity between those two areas strengthens over time if you visualize and then pair it with actual physical movement. And they've done this with basketball players, swimmers, golfers, everyone. It's really interesting. And What that means for us, if we want to adopt that as a tool to be able to create new habits, is that if you visualize yourself in a particular scenario doing a different thing or a new thing, it means that you now have a blueprint for then enacting on this new habit. Now, the caveat is that you do have to pair it with physical activity. Otherwise, it's just imagination. You're doing it in vain. I always use the running habit example. If you're trying to adopt a running habit, you could visualize yourself waking up, not snoozing the alarm, getting out of bed, putting on your clothes, putting on your shoes, and then actually leaving the door. Because a lot of the times people will say, oh, I want to do this new habit. And then they get to Friday and they think, I actually completely forgot that I said I was going to go for a run on Tuesday and Thursday. So visualizing yourself on a Tuesday, on a Thursday, going for these runs or the night before is really helpful. Now, visualization can also be less kind of mental imagery, but visualization can also be where you write things down or you color block them, because now you're visualizing how your week is going to look. So there are some people who have aphantasia, which is the inability to visualize in their mind's eye a particular image. So visualization can also be you bullet pointing everything on a piece of paper and just, I've got a calendar here, I can see it right now. And I don't have issues with visualizing, but I can still visualize my whole year ahead, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Not all of it, obviously, but I know I'm going to New York in June.
Oh, that's exciting.
I'm going to LA in Jan. Yay.
Oh, yeah.
I need to do an Australia trip.
Yeah, 100%. Oh, people in Australia would absolutely love and adore you.
I have a big following in Australia. I went on
Cooper Chapman.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a friend of mine.
Yeah, I went on his podcast and I just became so popular in Australia.
Yeah. That's, I think, one of the first places I found out about you, because we've done like a retreat with Coops and he's like part of my crew in Oz, and he has the Good Human Factory.
Yes.
And such a cool guy, man. Like, I
Isn't
think
he just such a special person?
Yeah, anyone that I get so excited about seeing, like anyone talking about mental health, but I think he is just such a cool, relatable dude, and for him to be speaking about mental health is just it's so nice to have all these people from all different walks of life speaking about these things, because we all are looking to change and transform in different ways. And I think that we're all trying to find like that person that we relate to or that we connect to. And then that person can then help us find the next person. It's just this beautiful stepping stone.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
I wanted to ask as well, with like visualization and the mind, I've done a lot of like thinking myself about how the brain really can't distinguish between what is real and like what's imagined. I've always, whenever I've heard that back in the day on podcasts, I was like, what, really? Like, is that seriously what's going on? I'd love you to talk about that from like a scientific point of view. Like, why is that and how true is that statement?
Yeah, it's pretty true. It's pretty true. So they actually did a study where they stressed out two groups. I think I spoke about this in Rewire. And group number one were asked to sit on the sofa and relax after the stressful event. And group number two were asked to play Tetris. And what they saw was that the group that played Tetris recovered from the stress a lot quicker. And that is because group number one that was sat on the sofa was still replaying it in their mind. And so their brain was perceiving to still be in a threatening environment. And so when we come home and we're still thinking about the argument we had at work, or we're replaying that person that cut us off in traffic, our brain still perceives the threat to be there. And so removing yourself from that by completely absorbing yourself into something else is really helpful. So things like hobbies, or doing a self-regulatory tool like the physiological sigh, or anything that's going to help you essentially lower those stress hormones. So that's the key there, is you want those stress hormones to lower down, because once those stress hormones have lowered, you can then think about it more logically and probably interpret it as, okay, these are just thoughts, or I'm actually in this situation. Whereas when you've got a lot of limbic system activity, which is your emotional brain, that's when you start to catastrophize and you go down this rabbit hole. Can you resonate with that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Can I resonate with that? I'm like, girl.
Straight down the hatchet.
You're not talking to a saint here. You're talking to someone that has been in her depths of her darkness and her shit. I have catastrophized about things I look back on and I'm like, wow, we really made, like, I feel like sometimes I've written like a 4-part trilogy to like my own bullshit. And then I look back, I'm like, wow, like I really just made like a whole entire book that didn't exist. Before I learned how to meditate and before I really learned how to control my awareness in my mind, I got into this work because I was the most scatterbrain, uncalm, unpresent, anxious, depressed. I was such a different person to who I am today. And when I think back to when I wasn't aware of the ability to basically able to observe my thoughts and realize that thoughts are just things. They don't actually mean that they're me, and I don't have to believe everything I think. Before I had any of that awareness, I used to have something happen to me and I would just get stuck in it, make a story about it, make a narrative about it, stuff it down in my subconscious and make a habit loop about it. So yeah.
I'm going to give you a really amazing analogy, which I'm actually using in my next book. I'll just plus it with the idea.
Can I just say, we just got an exclusive, the next book.
Yes.
Very exciting.
I was going to say, no one's actually heard that before. So,
well,
you guys are welcome.
It's a Mindspo exclusive.
So you basically got your frontal cortex and your limbic system, and the two do communicate with one another. Now, emotional awareness and the ability to regulate comes from the functional connectivity between the two. So what that means is you create a little bridge between the two that becomes efficient at communicating. So it's not that you don't feel negative emotions, it's that you have a better understanding of how to get back from that because you have a little ladder. Now, I was talking to a friend and I was saying it's kind of like I've got this ladder and I know, I was in the depths of despair a couple of weeks ago and I kind of like I said, I went down to say hi to Satan. But I know how to get back up. So being down there didn't scare me. Of course, it was uncomfortable and I wanted to not be there, but it didn't freak me out because I had the tools to be able to get back out of there. I actually have an elevator now, if you will.
I love that.
And over time, by strengthening that emotional awareness and strengthening your ability to feel your emotions, you have a better understanding of how to get from that emotion back up to a place of quote unquote comfort or whatever you want to call it. And so you start to fear the pain less. You start to fear what it feels like to feel rubbish a lot less because you know that you can get back at any point.
Yeah, I think it's like that reps, isn't it? I love how you put it. Just knowing that the feeling, but then knowing you can get back. It's, you've done a rep. You're like, okay, yeah, I can lift this. I can get back to this.
Yes. And I think that's an important tool to understand is that it doesn't matter if you feel like that because it will at some point change. Because a lot of the time we're also just trying to push these emotions away. We don't want to feel them. And that actually makes the situation worse. I always explain it like this. So you've got this default mode network, which you probably have an incredible default mode network. I'd love to come and spend a day in your brain because you meditate a lot. But the default mode network is responsible for internal mind wandering, creativity. It's a place you access when you're meditating. You've got the essential executive network, which works in tandem with this network. So you're not pondering your 9-year-old life, you're paying attention to me. And so what happens is a lot of people keep themselves busy because they don't want to be confronted with their inner thoughts. And so they'll text people and they'll scroll social media, binge watch TV and do anything but sit with their own thoughts. Now, the default mode network is like a garden. The more time you spend in it, the better place it is because you've tended to it. You've pulled the weeds, you've planted the flowers, you've made the flower beds. If you ignore it, it overgrows. It becomes a place that every time you go there, you think, I don't want to be here. And that's why I think your community is probably also benefiting so much from this Mindspo because you're essentially promoting this time within that default mode network and you're all creating beautiful, beautiful gardens.
Yeah, it's so interesting. One of the things that I really learned on my own journey is that I'm going to be with me for the rest of my life and that this is the longest relationship that I'm ever going to have. And that for me was, I remember when I had that like piece of awareness, I was like, this is the longest relationship that I'm ever going to have in my life. And I'm going to have to sit with myself for the rest of my life. It was just me when I came in and it'll just be me when I go. I want to make sure that when I'm by myself, it's a nice place to be.
I love
because
that.
I used to really hate being by myself. And I think that one of the most beautiful things about things like meditation or journaling or any of these self-awareness tools where we can meet ourselves and meet where we're at is that when we meet ourselves, it's like we have an opportunity to improve the relationship with ourselves and work on that relationship. And I think people forget that. I love that you're explaining that from like a neuroscience point of view because I think that people need to understand that you actually are making changes when you can sit with yourself and be with yourself and learn how to be in that space. It's like you described it as a garden. garden, which I love. Part of me is just had this visual because I imagine my house as a mind. And one of the things that I imagine is mind house. I've written about this in my book. And I imagine that the garden that you're talking about for me is maybe a white room. And it's like being in that room, when I get to be in that white room, if I just go in there every now and then, I'm like, oh God, this feels like an insane asylum. I don't want to be here. It's all white. And I kind of feel like I'm in the psych ward. But because I go there a lot, I'm like, oh, well, I've painted a picture over here, and I've got a mat over here, and oh, now I've moved a couch in here, and oh, we've got this like beautiful TV, and oh, we've even got like a playpen where I can do my art. I feels like as a meditator or as someone that has been doing like a lot of self-awareness work, I've kind of built this inner world to be a much nicer place to live. But gosh, when I first used to go to my inner world, I was like, what? Why would I want to sit in here? This is where all the shit comes from. This is where like I feel insane in this spot. So I think it's such beautiful that the science backs it up, that you can just kind of go there and really work on yourself.
I think one thing that blows my mind is if these two networks are kind of like in tandem. So the central executive network is where you experience the external world, and the default mode network is where you experience your internal world. How crazy is it how much influence we allow ourselves to receive from the external world all the time? And then in comparison, how much time do you spend inside your own internal world? And I think that freaks me out because I'm like, everything's so external all the time. I constantly have an influence from social media and other people, but then I want to make sure that I'm balancing that with alone time, alone by myself. I remember I used to come home when I was younger, and I used to lie in my bed and daydream. And I used to I couldn't wait to come home so I could daydream. And I'm trying to incorporate that more into my life now, where I'll just sit and not think of anything, and I just daydream, and I like allocate time for daydreaming. And I make up crazy stories sometimes in my head, but not in like a weird way. It's just like an imaginative way of like where I want to be or what I want to do or what I am doing. And I think that we are losing that ability to daydream. And in those daydreams, it's where I get my most creative ideas for second book, or ideas for business, or ideas about myself. And I have a light bulb moment about how I see the world. And I think we should all try and encourage that a little bit more.
Yeah, it's so funny. I got to say, I get emotional thinking about this, because I think for you're describing to me like the science is something that is like such a huge part of my life. I call it in my book, Magnetic, I call it the world of what if, because I tried to redescribe. I think we think about what if as a negative thing, like what if this happens? What if that happens? And it's always been negative. Whereas I describe what if, it's like, what if it all works out? What if everything unfolds perfectly? What if I get the job? What if I take the trip? And I've tried to like rephrase it. But a huge part of what I've written about is the imagination, because I think for me, my inner world has been the place where all the magic has happened. It's like where I feel like I have a stronger connection sometimes, I feel, to my inner world than my outer world. And I love how you've described the science of that, because it's such a beautiful thing, I think, when we have these conversations, because I come from things from a very like spiritual, maybe a bit woo, some would say, and then you're coming from like a scientific perspective, but then also with a personal development, like relatability perspective. And it's just so nice to have those two things mirrored together, because it's such a beautiful thing to realize that so often we're talking about the same thing or very similar things, but in different ways, and how they actually all intertwine. And it really is, it's just such a beautiful thing, I think.
Yeah. And I love that, because sometimes I will be talking to a friend and I may be in a bad place, and they'll say things like, oh, like you probably already know this. And it's almost like they don't want to tell me their side because they think they teach me how to suck eggs. And I'm like, no, I want to hear it from your perspective. Just because I know it from a scientific standpoint doesn't mean that I don't want to hear it from you as well, because you're going to say it in a different way. And even if you say it in the exact same way, it's still nice to hear. And it's almost like these conflating pieces of information that all amalgamate into the same outcome is really important. And I love that. Firstly, can I just say, I'm so excited to read your book. Like, I am so excited. Everything you're saying, I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, I can't wait. I mean, I really couldn't wait, but I can't wait. But just to add a little bit to that layer, here I come in with the science again.
Yes, give it to us. I'm so here for it.
Out of the 8 basic emotions, you've got 4 negative, 2 positive, and then surprise and anticipation, which are either positive or negative. Now, the problem is that we tend to dwell more on the negative, and we actually give more weight to negative information. The brain actually perceives negative information with more of an action potential. So there's a bigger spike in the neurons communicating when we perceive negative information. Mm-hmm. So we give more weight to them. And what I love about what you've just done is that the if can be positive, because normally we're like, what if, in a negative way? And I love that, because now you've got anticipation reframed or rewired into a positivity, which is like, what if it does work out? And I just love that you said that because, yeah, a lot of people dwell on that what if.
Yeah. And I think that's just like such a testament to like the power of rewiring, how we can take something that was, because you talk a lot in the book about association and how the brain is an association machine, and how I'd love you to talk a little bit about that from like a science perspective, because I guess what we're talking about here is I've taken something that used to be a negative and I've tried to reframe it as a positive, and I've tried to change my association. And then that's helped me change my experience of the world by changing my association. So let's dive into association a little bit.
Yes. So we basically operate on association, right? So you walk into your grandmother's house and you automatically think of cookies, when in your own house, you would never really think of that. And that is because subconsciously your brain has associated that place with a place that has cookies. And that's a very sort of simple way to look at it, but association happens all the time. So you're working on your computer, you have your phone in the near vicinity, there's an association that a notification could come in at any point. And so your ability to concentrate is now diminished because you're still subconsciously paying attention to this thing a lot of the time. Or cue triggers responses, which is, I've been trying to answer this question as to whether we have any free will as humans, because there was an experiment that was done in the 80s where they basically saw that we actually initiate movement about a second to half a second before we actually do something. And that is because our brain will see something and then by association will enact. So have you ever left your phone at home and then you grab into your pocket to try and reach for the phone, and then you're like, oh yeah, I don't have it with me today?
Yeah.
That is an association that your brain has made, and that is probably triggered by different things. Maybe it's something you saw, maybe something you thought, and so it triggers a motor response to reach into your pocket, grab the phone that is now not there. And so what was your question again?
Oh no, I'm so fascinated. Like, if someone's wanting to rewire themselves, maybe to have a more positive association with, let's like give a very practical example. Say someone is wanting to have a more productive workspace, and they currently have an association with their workspaces, like somewhere where they scroll their phone and binge out on YouTube and they procrastinate a lot. How can we use that power of changing our association with something to then change how we show up?
Yes, that's actually a really good example, because so I have an office, which is great. And I mean, I'm not perfect. I've got my phone in here today. I'm recording, but I do try and leave my phone in a different room when I come in here to write, or when I come here to do some deep work, the phone is in a different place, because I will need to associate this room with productivity, not with a place where I scroll. And so if I want to scroll, I almost say, I'm like, I need to leave the room, scroll outside, come back in. Otherwise I'm creating an association that I can do whatever I want in this room, and it's absolutely fine. And it's associated with like confusion. Whereas no, this is the booth that I sit in and I work at. And it's the same with people that work from home. If you're working in your pajamas or you're not sort of showing up for work, I always put on clothes. When I sit down to write, I get dressed as if I'm going to the office, because otherwise it's like, how do I differentiate between Nicole that's sat watching TV or reading her book in her bed in my pajamas versus Nicole that has to actually do something that's very productive? And so by association, as soon as I put on my clothes, my brain's okay, we're in work mode now. And it's the same thing with coming home from work. I always make sure that I leave my work in this room. I leave the room and I'm like, okay, I'm at home now. I'm not in work mode anymore. Maybe I'll put my slippers on or change my top, or whatever it is that I do to then make that association that now I'm in relaxed mode. Otherwise, I'm bringing on work stuff into my evening. One of the things I talk about in Rewire in terms of association is when you perform a negative habit, let's say you do something that you didn't want to do, what you can actually do is use that as an opportunity to use that as an association for something positive.
Yeah,
so it could look something like this. Yeah. So maybe, I don't know, maybe give me an example. I try not to give examples because I don't want to shun on anyone's bad habits.
Oh, it's okay. We just use anything. It doesn't matter. Okay. No one's going to get shots fired.
Look, there's nothing wrong with eating cookies, okay? But it's obviously a fine line. Let's say you are trying to not eat as many sweets as you already do, but you do it anyway. Instead of berating yourself for the fact that you just ate those sweets, you could use that as a cue to remind you to do something positive. So you said you were going to meditate 5 minutes every single day in your work break or whatever. So you could use that as an opportunity to say, okay, well, I just did that thing. I'm going to now turn this into a positive and use it as an association to do that thing that I promised myself I was going to do. And what happens over time is that you are essentially adding on another step to the sequence of neurons that are firing in sequence. And eventually what will happen is that your brain will go, okay, I'm craving cookies or sweets or whatever, but I know that at the end of that comes meditation. And then once you bring awareness into it, you can sort of fast track that sequence of events and go straight for the meditation and cut out the cookies.
I love that. And I would love to know, so as someone who has written Rewire, who is, I guess, like a pro when it comes to rewiring their mind, if you were to give us like a mini crash course, other than obviously buying your book and going out there and getting like the in-depth knowledge, because I think that's one thing people really need to understand. As much as you can like listen to this podcast and kind of get all these tips and tricks and bits and pieces, I do want to just give a shout out to books right now as someone who's also just written a book.
Yeah.
There is so much, like I know from firsthand experience how much intention and just time and really thought, like deep thought that you put into the structure of this book, the way that is done, the way that it follows, the examples that is given, and it is really set up to help people learn how to make lasting change. And I think you can, hear all these things on podcasts and get all these hot tips on Instagram, but when you actually sit with a book like Rewire and you actually go through and you read it step by step, or you listen to it on the audiobook and you actually take it in, you're going to have such a better chance of being able to like actually make a change and implement it, because you're going to have all of the information, all the inspiration, and you're going to be like kind of soaking yourself in the knowledge, because you're not just listening to an hour while, because I'm sure most people are on the treadmill or on the way to work, but it's like, no, you're sitting with a book and you're really like soaking it up. But if they haven't read the book yet and they're like, okay, but I really want to make a change starting today. If you were making a change today, Nicole, and you wanted to rewire yourself to act in a different way or show up differently, what's kind of like your kind of quick guide or steps that you would go through?
So I broke the book up into 3 phases. And phase 1 is to ditch that negative. So it teaches you all about anxiety, stress, what's going on, negative thought patterns, negativity bias. So it kind of primes you to understand what is going on. So I would say that in life, it's the same, how to break those negative thought patterns and pay attention to the ditching the negative. So I would say that that's probably step number 1, even though phase 2 is all of the steps that you need. So phase 2 has 7 steps to changing, but it definitely starts with step, I guess, 0.5.
Yeah, but I love that, because it's also just allowing people to realize like where they're at. Because I think sometimes you can go in with a step plan, but then the beautiful thing I think you've done about Rewire, because I remember when you were, if you don't mind me sharing, I remember when you were like saying to me before it comes out, you're like, is the book too heavy at the beginning? I was like, no, I'm sure it'll be fun. Then when I read it, I'm like, I'm so happy that you went there with all of that in the beginning, because I think most people, that's where they're at.
Yeah.
You met people like actually where they're at, and it's not actually probably where most people want to say that they're at. If you ask most people like, how are you going? Most people are going to be like, you know what? I'm bombarded with 1,000,001 negative thoughts and I'm dealing with all of this shit and I'm really stressed out. Oh, yeah. Most people just gloss over it and then they just want to hear like how to actually take action. But I think the fact that you acknowledge that at the beginning, that's where people are at. So that's just my little 2 cents on that.
I love that. I love that. Thanks for remembering that and sharing that. So yeah, I agree. I think the slogan for the book was, it's not you, it's your brain. Yeah, I think that that's what phase 1 essentially does. It helps people understand that there's nothing wrong with them, and that the reason they're going through all these different things or behaving in particular ways is because of these stories that they've been sort of telling themselves or patterns that they've learned from their childhood. And it teaches you how to break those negative patterns. So I'll talk about maybe 3 steps from phase 2. So phase 2 is a 7-step process. I think definitely the most important one for me is making sure that you're cleaning out the information that you consume, the social media, the people you're hanging out with, because all of that has a huge influence on you and how you perceive yourself. And so spring cleaning your social media and the people around you, I think is definitely the most important step for me anyway. We've got visualization in there, which we touched on a little bit. But step number 3, which is preparing for setbacks, or my step number 3 that I'm talking about now, is preparing for setbacks. Because when we prepare for setbacks, we put ourselves in a place of empowerment. So what that looks like is a couple of ways. So you could either plan that your personal trainer is going to probably cancel on you, like they maybe did a couple of months ago. And instead of going, oh, well, that's my cue to not go to the gym, you have prepared for that setback. And now you have a plan B. So you have a home workout that you can do in 20 minutes. So that's one way to do it. preparing for setbacks can also look like, okay, maybe you've got children who don't sleep very well, or you've got a baby and they keep you up at night. So preparing for setbacks is knowing that that could happen. So you're in a much better position. You're much better equipped and aware to deal with the next day. So whatever it is that you need to do, maybe you can just make it shorter. Maybe you work out for 10 minutes instead of an hour.
So powerful.
Maybe you, I don't know, plan to order in because you knew you might be tired, but you order in healthy instead of a pizza. And it's all these kind of like putting you in a place of power. So step number 3 is definitely preparing for setbacks. And then I talk a lot about fear and self-sabotage in that phase of the book. So the how to let go of those self-sabotaging behaviors and essentially put yourself in a place where you are able to confront the fear. And the crux of it is that brave people don't live without fear. They just do it anyway. And fear...
I love that you say that. I literally recorded a podcast I have to say this. It'll come out before this. I recorded a podcast last night, Nicole, that said, feel the fear and do it anyway.
Yeah. And a great book as well. I don't know if you've read it, but...
I haven't read the book. Is there a book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway? Oh, God. I know what I'm ordering after this.
Yeah. I mean, it's basically exactly that. I don't want to like shit on the book. It's a great book, but it's if you understand the concept, then you've got it. If you don't understand the concept, then I would say that it's definitely something you need to read.
Yeah.
But yeah,
everyone's reading Rewire instead. Don't worry.
Exactly.
That's on the next list. They go really well together. I will say,
they do.
Like, because I didn't get to read your book until after I've written mine, and then it was just like it was so wild. Like when I was reading, I was like, wow, like there's so many things that are like similar in some aspects, explaining things from different perspectives. But I'm like, there's so much science that like where you come at it, which is like things that like I didn't go into that you really explain in such a powerful way. And then even with me, with the whole like imagination stuff, like it's such a beautiful like balance of science and spirituality.
Leaving it up to what has been ingrained. And what has been ingrained? Lying on the sofa, binge watching Netflix instead of putting yourself in a place of power, because your brain hasn't got the capacity to think outside of the box in a setback or when you're stressed or when you've got XYZ going on. So if you've written it down and you've planned for it, your brain can go, okay, we have this in our toolbox. I'm not going to revert back to automatic, which is self-sabotage.
Yeah. We're not just going to go back to the subconscious program that we've been doing for the last 10 years. We're actually going to have a different angle of what we're going to do. I love that. Oh.
Yeah. And then phase 3, sorry, just to finish it off, is boost the positive. So it's all about how to maintain that level of change that you've just created. Because I think a lot of people talk about the change, but then they don't really discuss what it takes to maintain it for a long period of time. Prolonged period of time, if you will.
Look, Nicole, I adore you as a person and just also as a professional. I think you're so down to earth, relatable, and just cool. I think that like you're just a cool person, and I just like I'm really
on my CV. I've been called cool as a scientist.
But I think you make things relatable and fun, and I'm just so excited. Like I said, that like my wise friend now has a book that people can go and read, and I don't have to. So I think that if anyone is really interested in changing their lives and really learning the science behind why we are how we are and how we can reinvent ourselves and rewire ourselves to create something new and kind of just get out of that rhetoric that like, oh, I'm always going to be this way. I think that Rewire is such a powerful read, and I'm just so grateful for you coming on the podcast. And I'd love you to tell people, so firstly, I want to say to everyone, Nicole has an amazing Instagram where you really do these beautiful infographics where you just break down these sometimes complex topics that feel like a lot to read or like watch a reel on, but you do a lot of really amazing graphics. And I think that for me, I have like folders saved and graphics. And before I, really got to know you, I was like, wow, I've actually saved a lot of Nicole's graphics over the years of things that you said that I was like, I'm going to come back to that. So I think
that is so sweet. Thank you.
So people can go and follow you, and you know that you're going to be a little boost of serotonin in their feed, which I think is you're such a great person to follow online. So we're going to have all of your links down below. You've started a YouTube channel.
I have indeed.
It's beautifully done. So go check that out. And how else can people work with you, find you? You've got a retreat going on. Tell us all about your things.
I do. The retreat's actually sold out, which is so exciting. In less than 2 weeks. I'm actually going to do a post about it today.
I didn't know that. Congratulations.
Thank you. We're actually opening up 5 more slots though, which is exciting. So yeah, YouTube, I'm answering Dear Nicole dilemmas every 2 weeks. So any dilemma you've got, I get all kinds of things from like my boyfriend broke up with me and moved to a new country all the way through to I'm dealing with negative thoughts, etc. So any dilemmas you've got, send them to me. There's a little form that you can fill out on my link in bio. And I'll answer them in the YouTube channel. So Nicole's Neuroscience on Instagram, Nicole's Neuroscience on YouTube.
Amazing. Well, I'm really excited for everyone to go and read Rewire, go follow your stuff and get connected with your work. You're epic and I adore you.
And I think those two books need to be on people's coffee tables together because they're just so complementary. I mean, they're so beautiful.
Shall we just hello, do you want your coffee tables to look like this? Is this what you were visualizing for your coffee table? Because I can tell you now, it's a good look.
It is a good look.
It also says that you're like, I just think there's something about this that says like, I'm zen and really smart.
Yes, I love it. They look so good together. And look, I'm so grateful for having you in my life. I feel like the world brought us together, and I just am so I give a lot of gratitude to that.
Yeah, it's really, really cool, I think, when we do these big things in life, when you can meet people in these really interesting moments. I think that's been such I don't know, I never thought writing a book I always thought it would be a time of solitude. And instead it ended up being a time where I've made friends and connections.
Yeah. But it's such a lonely thing. And that's why when you were writing, I reached out to you and I said, look, if you ever need to vent, I'm here, because I did it before you and I felt like it was such a lonely experience for me.
You said that. And I was like, oh, she said I can vent? Does she know I can send a 5-minute voice note every day?
That is hilarious. Most of the people because I think I wrote the book a little bit before you and a few of other people. And I found myself sort of being like the agony aunt, giving everyone advice of my experience. And I loved sharing it because I wanted you all to succeed from my mistakes.
Yeah, but that's one of the most beautiful things about you. Collaboration over competition is one of my massive, massive, massive values. And I think the fact that you were like, hey, I've done this, and you had nothing to gain, like having me in your voice notes. And but instead you were like, no, it's okay. Don't go insane. They also cut all this stuff at my typesetting. It's all right. I also had a freak out about this. Oh, okay. Wow. I'm not insane. So yeah, I appreciate you so much. Everyone go out and buy Rewire. And I want to say to everyone, if you do go out and buy Rewire, one thing that you can really, really do for Nicole that I think is just such a powerful thing that I don't think enough authors really communicate is when you do go and read this book, go leave a review for it on Amazon and write how this book, Rewire, has changed your life. If you have read any books this year, one thing I can say from 2 authors, just go and share what the books have done, because reviews are so important. So if you do that, just go and give Rewire a review so people can really understand like how a book like this can change your life. So thank you so much, Nicole. I'm sure we'll have you on the podcast again, hopefully next time in person.
Yes, I hope so. I need to do an Australia trip. I know you're in Barney right now, but I need to make my way that side.
Hey, if you're going to go to Oz, I'll make sure, we'll plan it with when it's like a good time to go to Oz. But I think you'd do so well doing some events over there and stuff as well. I think.
Yeah, I love Australia.
I went to Human Show in Australia and he was like, we have such a huge he has such a huge following there. It's because Aussies are so about improvement.
I have a huge following from Australia as well. I think like 12 or 15% of my following is Australian, which is great. It's more than the UK.
Yeah.
And I'm from the UK. Well, I'm not from the UK, but my business is there. So yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Love you so much. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining me for this episode. You can discover more from Mindspo on Instagram and TikTok by following @Mindspo and myself @Rochelle_Fox. If this episode inspired you, then please pass it on and share the love. And if you're new to our world and you want to elevate your mind and step into your best self, then be sure to download our app, Manifesty, from the App Store and take advantage of the free trial. With Manifesty, you can create your own vision board movies, practice powerful meditations, and set affirmation reminders so your phone supports your journey towards that abundant vision of your future. And lastly, always remember, you create your own reality. So go and make some magic.